Let's start that word chat.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to That Word Chat. Welcome to our guest, Jane Friedman. Very excited to have Jane here today. Jane has been somebody I've been aware of, been following for years on Twitter, where I follow where I make most of my friends these days, I suppose. Jane is a writer and editor. She's a teacher. She's a consultant. She has a great, amazing pedigree in her field. She was publisher of Writer's Digest. She now produces The Hot Sheet, the essential publishing industry newsletter for authors. And her writing has appeared in Writer's Digest, Publishers Weekly, on her own blog at janefriedman.com. She teaches with the great courses, and she's the author of Publishing 101, and most recently, The Business of Being a Writer. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to see you in person after all these years of only seeing you as a static Twitter icon or in your newsletters on your website. I've always been tangential, I think, to your message and what you do, because I work with authors as an editor, as a copy editor, but I don't, usually my relationship with publishing is authors ask me for my advice, and I say, well, you should go to Jane Friedman's blog, first of all, and then I try to pass along whatever limited information I have, and then usually there's a conversation about what I would charge to copy their book, and I tell them, and they say, okay, thanks, and I'll find somebody else to do it. So I still have a lot to learn in that regard. So there are a couple of, and I'm going to stop talking and let you talk in a minute, but there's a couple of hot topics in publishing these days, and one is the pandemic, of course, and then another one is sort of this the whole discussion about diversity in publishing that is certainly been brought to it's sort of been out there, and it's been brought to the fore, I think, by recent events with the protests. And let's start first of all, pandemic. You're in Charlottesville, Virginia still?
I am.
And
That's
so
right.
how is isolation in Charlottesville?
Well, we've been fortunate that we're not a hot spot, at least not so far. The state has declining cases, but we are a university town. University of Virginia is here. So right now I'm just a little bit anxious about all those students coming back in the fall, which that they are scheduled to come back. And we'll see what happens.
Right. Is there a different schedule? Are they doing the done at Thanksgiving thing? Or,
they probably are. I don't remember the particulars. I'm sure there are lots of caveats to them coming back, but there will be in-person classes.
Okay. I visited Charlottesville once, and found it, such a charming, wonderful little town. Probably a great place to be isolated if you're going to be isolated, because there's a lot of nice little shops and restaurants and public spaces there.
Indeed. It is very idyllic in its way.
Yes. Let's talk about, can we talk about the diversity issue first?
Sure.
There's been a call, an awareness, I think, recently about the need for diversity in publishing. There's been issues at organizations that I'm sure aware of, that where the needs uh, um, of a diverse group of authors have maybe not been met, and of course, there's been a lot of criticism of the big publishers for around these issues. So,
Yep.
so where do we stand, and how has that changed, sort of, the advice you would give to authors, both authors of color and white authors who maybe are being thought of secondarily now, or are they?
Well, why don't I start with some history and context for the issue, which might be helpful. This is not a new issue. I mean, it's an issue that goes right back to the 60s and 70s before I was even in the publishing industry. And I think that there have been what you might call roughly 3 stages of awareness in publishing, people who work in publishing. The first stage of awareness is we need more diverse books, which is we need more stories that feature people of color or Black people or Indigenous people. And what happened at some point is that some more of those stories did come out, but more often than not, they were from white authors. So this is a little bit problematic. And this led to another phase of what you might have heard as own voices, hashtag own voices. So this idea that stories from marginalized communities should be told by those communities. If you look at some of the recent studies of the book publishing market, specifically the commercial Big Five publishing market, you'll see that, you know, if you had 100 books about people of color, maybe only half would be by people of color. So this is another issue that has to be resolved and grappled with. Resolved is the wrong word. It's grapple is probably better.
There's no resolution really, except for the point where we stop talking about it. Well, it's where it should be.
Right. And now I feel like we're reaching, I don't want to say a more necessarily a deeper understanding, because it's still very early. Like, there's still lots of changes that have to happen. But there's an awareness that people inside publishing houses and all up and down the supply chain need to better reflect, you know, the demographics of this country. So there's a specific survey that comes out every year from the organization called We Need Diverse Books, or is it's from Lee and Low Publishers. They might do it in collaboration with We Need Diverse Books, looking at the makeup of the publishing industry, looking at agents, editors, authors, marketers. I don't know if they look at booksellers, but they're part of this equation too. And it's just white. It's hashtag publishing so white. People who look like me, a lot of white women. And, you know, I think it's particularly striking when you look at the marketing end, where it's a really low percentage of people. Also on the leadership level, the executive level, very few people of color rising up through the ranks. So, you know, this problem is systemic, it's institutionalized, and there's a lot of work that has to be done to change that. I mean, there are some positive signs in that internships and lower level employees are starting to diversify, but, you know, that's not sufficient. And, you know, we also can't just stop at the publishers themselves. We also have to be looking at booksellers and the people at chain stores who are buying the books, because a Black authored book or a diverse book can be stopped at any stage. It can be stopped at, you know, when books get sent out for review, or you try to get placement in a store and those people say no because they don't feel like it will connect with who they think reads books. So I just wanted to lay kind of that groundwork, because I know that this issue gets talked about in a lot of different ways, and it's multifaceted. It's very challenging. And I think it's sometimes easier to talk about it by looking at case studies like American Dirt, which, if anyone's been following publishing news, you probably saw the huge, I guess you could rightly call it a scandal, of this author who was an Oprah Book Club pick and was really positioned to be the best-selling book of the year. A story about brown people, about immigrants, but not from that community. And so she just got very roundly criticized and and rightly so, for a lot of things, not necessarily for stepping outside our own experience, but for the clumsy way in which it got handled by the entire publishing sector. you know?
Right. Yeah.
Like there was the book launch party prior to it actually releasing. It was for booksellers and librarians, where they had barbed wire centerpieces, just things that are in such poor taste.
Yeah.
So as far as what this means for anyone submitting work, I mean, if you look at manuscript wish list, or you look at what agents and editors are asking for, they've been asking for more diverse submissions and books and authors for years. Like, this is not a new acquisition strategy. It's not a trend. There's a need for more diverse voices. But I feel like even though there's a lot of demand on the upfront, you run into some challenges once you enter into the commercial publishing system, where the advances maybe aren't commensurate with what white people get. And then the marketing and promotion support isn't commensurate. So there's so many, as I said, so many different facets of this that play out. I don't know that it should affect any one person's submission strategy, but you do need to pay really close attention to what agents and editors, what they're asking for, and you have to be aware of the own voices issue. If you are going to write outside of your own experience, you need to be really prepared for the debate that's going to spark. It's not that you can't, but make sure you educate yourself through some of the excellent articles that have been written by people of color about, if you're going to go about this, how do you do it in a way that's not going to set you up for failure?
Well, that's actually my next question, is how do you do it in a way that's not going to set yourself up for failure?
Right. There's a really good piece by, I think it's Alexander Chi, talking about, because this is, this question comes up a lot with established authors or people who've done it before. I think Alex Harrow is another one. I believe she's a white woman, or identifies as one, and her first name is spelled Alix, Alex Harrow. I think she writes science fiction fantasy. She gets asked this a lot because she wrote a book, I believe, that was outside of her own experience. And so she's asked, how do you do that? And so if you go and read those two people, that's like a starting point to learning kind of the education you need to be going through. I think the other issue that comes into play is that writing a white character is not a neutral choice either. I mean, so I think those two authors are both explaining the position of that pretty clearly and better than I can.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So one more quick question on this topic. Is there an institutional problem? I mean, you say the publishing industry has been aware of this, has been dealing with it, but are we hopeful? Is it something that, I mean, a lot of people say the whole Big Five publishing system is the problem, and we need to sort of, start over, fire some people, that sort of thing. I mean, is this a systemic problem?
It has been, and it raises the question of what's going to be different this time. Like, it has to be more than lip service that's paid to the issue. You can't just post a Black Lives Matter image on your social account and say, job done. Fortunately, Penguin Random House, which is the biggest of the big five, they have come out with a really specific action-oriented plan that looks like it could produce some real meaningful change. But of course, it's going to take time. Like, it's going to take a year or two to be able to evaluate if it's working. And you can find the details of that plan if you're curious at Publishers Weekly. They had a really good write-up of that. Everything at Publishers Weekly, by the way, is free, so you don't need a subscription to go read the article on their website. And then Macmillan did something that was also a very strong response, but very different from Penguin. The CEO actually stepped down. This was only a week ago, and instead has put a committee in place. Although I have my own doubts about how well committees work, but it's a 13-person committee, diverse committee, that will be tasked with producing change and giving each imprint at Macmillan certain metrics that they need to reach. So, I have never seen this happen before. I've been watching the industry for more than 20 years, and I have not seen this sort of strong response. So, cautious optimism. I would say is my feeling about it. And you're also seeing a lot of organizations that are adjacent to the publishing industry responding strongly. There's also a lot of upheaval. Some of it, you feel like it's chickens coming home to roost. You know, we've seen the National Book Critics Circle, the Poetry Foundation, all kind of implode in some way, or have people step down, or it's not going to end this summer. I mean, these effects are going to be rolling out for a long, long, long time.
Interesting. That's a terrific summary. Let's move on to the pandemic. Again, this is a bit of an upheaval, and you've been, as you said, following the publishing industry. You've been following the publishing industry from the sort of beginnings, or I shouldn't say beginnings, but you've witnessed the rise of the self-publishing as probably a viable option. You've seen Amazon becoming the player in self-publishing. This seems pretty big too. I mean, we've had this show started because Mary Norris was supposed to come to my town and do a book talk, and it was canceled. And so we said, "Oh, let's do a show, and we'll get her on, and we'll just talk to her for an hour." So authors everywhere cancel their book tours. That's maybe book tours weren't such an essential part of it anymore, but it must make the marketing difficult. Bookstores, many have closed. So what's how do we navigate this as authors, and people are coming out with their first book this year, these poor people? How do they navigate it?
Well, the good news is that as far as unit sales, especially on the print side, they've remained basically flat when you compare them to last year. So this is according to BookScan, which tracks retail sales in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that bookstores aren't suffering. They are. Their sales are down 30% in March, more than 60% in April. So where are the sales going then? I think we can all probably make an educated guess about where they're going. Amazon is one, but the good news is that Bookshop, a new competitor to Amazon, is another place where people are going to buy their books. And so I think that's the good news, in the sense that if you have a book coming out, if you're affected by this pandemic, all indicators show that people are still buying books. They're still considered things that we need, whether for entertainment or education. The mix of books has certainly changed. Like early in the pandemic, the mix shifted to juvenile, especially nonfiction, because of having kids at home, needing to school them, needing to distract them with activity books and things of that nature. And adult fiction and nonfiction both had kind of some ups and downs, but the trend lines are starting to return to normal. Probably the biggest area to be affected has been adult hardcovers, just because those are the things that benefit from bookstore merchandising and placement.
Right.
So then the flip side of this is just author marketing and promotion. So how that pivots. And I'd say that so far, everyone's done a pretty stellar job of moving to virtual events and conferences. Bookstores and libraries alike have been doing partnership events with authors, still, trying to run things as close as they can to what they might have done in real life, and sometimes attracting bigger audiences, because now they can attract people from across the country and not just in their own city. They can attract people who aren't able to leave home because of accessibility issues or other issues. So, there is a bright side to this. Now, for the bookstores, I don't think it's that bright. They're the hardest affected. Fortunately, there's been a lot of money that's been donated to help those bookstores, and I hope that, they're going to pull through.
Yeah. And so we always like to tout the local bookstores. We want to promote your book. Do you have a Charlottesville bookstore that you like, a small independent?
Yes. Yeah, the independent here is New Dominion, right on the downtown pedestrian mall. So,
okay. And so if people go to their website, they can buy your book and have it shipped. Do they do that?
they do ship books. Whether they have mine or not is an open question. They might.
Well, they should. You're local. I mean, well, my books. So we have here in Bexley is Gramercy Books, and they will get whatever book I ask for, and I can go pick it up. But they'll also ship books. So let's see. We're in. We gotta get to it. Oh dear, I can't find it now. Here, no, wait. This is what they call in radio dead air. Um,
There's a Twitter account that follows people's bookshelf titles. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but it's a pretty funny Twitter account.
It follows bookshelf, like shelfies.
It's because everyone is now doing these sessions from home.
I see.
You get this, you get this ability to see inside people's homes and bookshelves, and so this bookshelf account has wry comments on what people choose to display behind them.
Right, and I always look over when we have a guest. I always look in any. Are you doing a lot of Zoom type things?
Well, to be honest, I was using Zoom years ago before it got popular in the last 6 months. But yes, more Zoom than ever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was gonna say you're definitely used to this, and we can see you've got a very nice microphone there on an arm, and the quality headphones that are plugged in. This is the book. This is your most recent book, and then you have what was it, Publishing 101? Is that?
Yeah, that's the older one. Yeah.
How long ago was that?
That was 2015.
2015. Okay, so it's just a few years ago. This has got like everything really you need to know. I mean, this is comprehensive, detailed, wonderful book. You know, I mean, if you gave me a nickel for every time I said go to Jane Friedman's site, I'd have many dollars anyway. So I think Erin, our associate producer, has a copy. I don't have Publishing 101 book, but there it is. She's holding it up.
Nice.
I think you have to speak, Erin, and we can't see you, right? People on speaker view.
Sorry about that. Yep. You can see I like it so much. I got all my flags, lots of notes and highlighting in it. This was a great book.
Thank you.
Yes. So, in copy editors, like I said at the beginning, as a copy editor, I get questions about publishing all the time, and I don't feel like I'm an expert. I think maybe probably Erin probably is a little bit more in tune with that. Other, people end up doing different sort of things as in editing, and most of my work is not published traditionally, but websites and things like that. So, but what as there are probably many copy editors on this call, what advice do you have to copy editors in how to be supportive of authors and in the publishing process? That's a broad question, isn't it?
I'm remembering back to when I worked at F&W Publications, which was the parent company of Writer's Digest. And of course, I hired freelance copy editors for our books. And I certainly remember the quality copy editors who were, I wasn't, the author, of course, had to field their queries. I didn't, but I had to gauge, are we going to use this copy editor again? Are they doing a good service to the author? And I think it's, obviously a good copy editor is able to clarify things that maybe the author wasn't able to express succinctly or clearly the first time around, but while also preserving the voice. So, I think that a great copy editor is saving the author in some regards. If the author's been unclear, if they're doing any light fact checking, they're saving them on that front too, if they've gotten anything wrong. and they're making sure that the author is conveying their message to the reader in the way that they intend. I don't know if that's the sort of answer you're looking for, but that's what I remember most from reviewing copy editors' work.
Right, and you've been copy editor yourself because you've published a couple of books. What was the process like?
Well, when I worked with the University of Chicago Press on the business of being a writer, because they do the Chicago manual, I was pretty much expecting like the most perfect copy editing process known to man. Like my mind would be blown, by whatever process they put that manuscript through. But it was just like any other copy editing process. That's not a slight on the copy editor I worked with. It was very thorough. It pushed me to reevaluate some different areas where it was clear what I was trying to say didn't come through. So it pushed me in a way that made me want to do better. I think it's always a tricky line, or like something it's tricky to balance. Like you don't want to. I've seen some copy editors bully authors unintentionally, or try to impose their will in some way on the manuscript. And certainly I think there are areas where the author should take the copy editor's feedback, even if it's kind of ventures more into what I would consider content editing or redirection of somehow of the content. But sometimes it's of service to the author. So when it's right to cross that line is hard for me to say.
Right. Well, right, and that's always a question. It's a question for the editor too, to know how much to insert in. And I tell my authors that what I'm doing here is suggestions, and you can. For some reason, I think it would work better this way, but if you disagree, it's your book and go ahead.
Yep.
And then to myself, I say, why are they not listening? But I might say, okay, it's your book. You do as you like, or your article or whatever it is. So.
It's your book. I remember that refrain.
Yes. We have a nice several dozen people in the audience here who may have questions, and I don't want to. It's sometimes hard for me to pay attention. Heather keeps track of things and signals me if we have any questions, and jumps in. Oh, and I just see she does. We do have some questions, so now's a good time. Let's take a few questions from our crew.
Perfect. So we have one from Jose. Jose, if you wanted to unmute and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Hey, I think one of the most revealing pieces of information that we've seen recently is how much of what we think about our beloved authors should be probably revisited through a different lens, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if from an editorial perspective, we should also, as publishers or people who promote content from authors whose views are controversial or just problematic from a perspective of inclusion or diversity, if there should be a more, let's say, formal stance from the editorial world as to what kind of contents we're promoting and revisiting authors that probably we should never promote again.
So you're asking internally at the publishing house, or yes. What should the editors do?
Correct.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. I think we're seeing the struggle of people trying to answer that question. So for example, what we saw earlier this year, I can't recall which Big Five publisher this was, maybe Simon & Schuster? I could be wrong though. It was the publisher of the Woody Allen memoir. And when, the publisher very tellingly withheld this information from anyone that they were releasing it. So about a month prior to the release, they revealed, hey, we're putting this out. And there were a number of employees who felt like this was simply unacceptable, and they staged a walkout. I can't remember the precise number, but let's say maybe 100 walked out. And, again, similar to what I discussed earlier on the diversity issue and how, there's been this really strong action and force for change. The publisher canceled the book and reverted all rights to Woody Allen within a couple days of that walkout. Again, something I have never seen. I did not expect the publisher to walk back on that. Now, another publisher did pick it up. So it's not like the book didn't go. I think we're going to.
I'm sorry. I don't know if he has a domestic publisher.
It's Skyhorse. That's the domestic publisher.
Oh, okay. He does that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember now if some of the big five took it overseas, but it may very well be with one of the big five in France or the UK.
There's Hatchet that.
Yeah.
Was the...
Yeah. So, now there's, now we're seeing J.K. Rowling is having some issues. There were staff at her publisher who they don't want to work on her book. The publisher has so far been very, unbending, unyielding, saying, sorry, but we're not severing our relationship with J.K. Rowling, and you're going to work on her book. Other areas where I've seen some pushback have to do with conservative authors like Milo, where his book was canceled and he ended up self-publishing. I do wonder if there's going to be a reckoning with conservative authors in the future. Any of the memoirs, by the Trump family or books that are just on that side of the political spectrum, will the big five publish them and profit off them? So again, I feel like I don't have a good answer for what editorial should do, but certainly we're seeing more and more editors and other people and all employees, it's not just the editors, stand up and say, I'm not going to be a part of this. And I think they have more power than they ever realized. And I think it's going to get used more often.
Yeah. I mean, the flip side is that there's, I think, most people in publishing would say that different viewpoints need to be heard, and therefore we should support. It's better to have a book than not have a book. And then, of course, the ancillary to that is we make money by by selling books, and therefore we're loath to always have to be precise with that word, to not publish something that's going to make us money by Ivanka Trump or whoever.
Yeah.
So, okay, is there, do we have another, do we take another question? I have my own, but I think we have some.
We do. We have one from Robin. Robin, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering, are agents and editors now seeking, who are seeking more representation of BIPOC writers, are they seeking that in proportion to population or beyond that? Is it regional in terms of population, or are there any certain goals in mind? I'm just wondering what that is. Thank you.
I haven't seen any specific requests that have to do with percentage of population, or I'm trying to fill specific slots, or I'm taking this number. Like, there isn't any quota system associated with it. I think it's more like a perpetual encouragement, open door, please send me more of this. This is what's being purchased. So I think they are, if I just base it on my experience working in publishing generally over 20 years, you get a lot of material from white folks and very little material from people of color. So I think that this is just a guess. I think they're trying very assiduously to, in their submissions pile, increase the percentage coming from Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations because they simply just don't have enough to consider. That's my guess. I could be wrong.
Let me backtrack briefly, and we'll get back to the questions. But you've been, since I became aware of you, you've been in Cincinnati at F&W Media, as you said. You're at the University of Cincinnati. About the time, like I think you and my son just missed each other. Our theme music writer, James Allen. So we've been down to Cincinnati a lot to see James, but then you moved off to Virginia, and you were with the University of Virginia, sorry, what was the publication? Virginia
At VQR?
Quarterly Review. Okay, yes, I'm sorry, blanked on the name of it. Now you're independent. Is that good description? So what's your workload like? What do you? I mean, I know you spend a lot of time giving others advice.
Yes.
I hope you're making money doing this. What's your work day like?
So my business is split into a few quadrants. So one quadrant is the paid newsletter I do, the hot sheet, which is industry reporting. Mm-hmm. So, it comes out every 2 weeks. So every day I'm always looking at the news, looking at opinions, attending sessions, trying to collect as many viewpoints as possible and as much news as possible, and then condensing it into this email newsletter that goes out. Then another quadrant is consulting. So just one-on-one client work with people who need help on the business side of publishing. Mm-hmm. Another quadrant is helping people with their submissions materials. So it's similar to the consulting, but it's done it's just an editing service, really. I wouldn't necessarily call it copy editing, although there's some of that in it. It's more about how have you angled your pitch? Have you made a persuasive case for this project, or have you conveyed the best qualities of this story? So I edit queries, synopses, book proposals, and so on. And then the other quadrant would be online education. So I run online courses, and both my own and guest instructors. So, a typical day usually includes a little bit of all four of those. I might have a client appointment, I'll do a query edit, I'll do some hot sheet research. Mm-hmm. I might put together a presentation for a class.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And is it, you're happy with the home office life?
Well, I've been working in this home office for 6 years. I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty settled. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. A lot of people are adjusting, and a lot of us say, "What's different?" We're used to working at home and communicating remotely. So do you get a lot of questions? I mean, it's emailed questions and questions on DMs and things like that. I mean, is it a constant stream? Does it get difficult to handle it all?
I get a lot of questions through my website because I have a contact form that anyone can use and anyone does use. So I get a lot of questions that way. And I get a lot of questions through a private Facebook group that I host. So I brought that one on myself. Well, I mean, it's all things that I bring on myself. But I do try to keep, I try to be somewhat accessible because that's what I'm here for. Like the only reason I can make a living is because people see me as a resource. So if I can answer people's questions, and especially if I can help them avoid making a really terrible decision, I like to help. So a lot of times people are asking me for recommendations of, how how do I find an editor? How do I find an agent? How do I find a publisher? So I try to give them a good starting point for answering those questions.
Yeah. Is that, what's the most common question?
I mean, it's almost always, how can I get this published? That's what a lot of questions boil down to. They may not be phrased that way, but that's what the person wants. They want to get published.
Right. And is, especially for first-time authors, there's a lot of sort of things to think about and consider. And one is sort of having a public presence, having, you know, I mean, there are a lot of people who write books, and more power to them. I wouldn't ever tell somebody who writes a book not to write a book, but there are a lot of people who, you know, maybe haven't followed through as they should to make it something that's publishable. And even if it is, I don't know, if I write a masterpiece, and I don't have an internet presence, I'm not on Twitter, if I write this wonderful story, and I type it up on my typewriter and put in an envelope and send it in, what are my chances of getting published? I mean, this is probably a Pulitzer winner and possibly a Nobel somewhere in the future. Is it going to see the light of day?
I mean, publishing has always been a little bit like, or it feels like winning the lottery on some level if you have a book that breaks out and earns you money or wins an award. You know, it's so many people. It's not that I think, where do I want to start? The odds aren't good, but also a lot of people are writing and publishing books that have very little writing and publishing experience. So they'll write and publish one book and then they're done. So once you filter all of that out of the equation, and then you look at people who continue, then I think the success rate improves dramatically. But many people get discouraged and they give up after one project for many reasons. And sometimes it's simply just a lack of validation or encouragement, or things didn't happen the way they thought. They thought they were going to become a bestseller. It didn't happen. Maybe they didn't get the support from their publisher that they wanted. There are all sorts of things that can dampen our spirits or discourage us, and we just give up. There was this statistic I quoted on Twitter. It was about a month ago, and it was fascinating how people reacted to it. So it was a statistic about, I'm not going to remember the precise numbers, but if you go back into my Twitter feed, you'll find it. Something like only, 5% of all authors go on to write as many as 10 books. And, you know, so it's basically the attrition rate that I just mentioned is put in really stark terms. And, you know, how people saw that was a real lens on how they experience publishing or what they think about publishing. So some people who self-publish, when they saw that, they were like, that's crazy. I've written 50 books. You know, people who write romance, who write commercial romance or science fiction fantasy, they looked at that and they're like, oh, come on, that's crazy. Like, who hasn't written 6 books? While there were some traditionally published authors who have clearly been burned and suffered, who saw that and they were like, yeah, of course people drop off because they're not getting any support, and it doesn't pay. Of course we're giving up. And then there are a lot of course, people on the spectrum, at all spots in between that. But most people were surprised and discouraged by the statistic.
Really, I think that in some ways the statistic would encourage me to beat the odds, to be the one who says, okay, I don't want to be one of the 5%, I want to be one of the 95%, I want to be one who makes a go at this. I mean, I suppose that's part of the advice you give people is don't be discouraged and don't think it's, you know, one book and you're going to, like I said, win a Pulitzer and go on to talk shows.
Yeah. I mean, if you're Harper Lee, I guess you can go with the one book strategy.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there anyone else like Harper Lee? I'm not sure that
There
there
are,
is.
well,
It is pretty
there are a few. In
incredible.
fact, I think if we
Or
look
maybe
at
a
some of
handful.
there are some authors who, do have one or two, amazing books. Maybe they wrote some articles or things before that. And I think we do tend to, it's like when I want to go into acting and I want to be the star of a movie. It doesn't necessarily, only a few people will get to that point. I want to be a baseball player and, be picked up in the major league. So let's go, before I run out of time, let me go back to questions because we have a couple of other good questions. Heather, who's on deck? Keep the baseball analogy.
I love it. We have Victoria up next. Victoria, if you wanted to unmute and ask your question.
Great. Hi, Jane. I guess my question is, I've been talking with other authors, white authors, about how we can best help promote writers of color. And given how slowly the publishing industry moves for change, what are some real effective, immediate things we can do? Like promoting someone to be on a panel discussion, something like that, but also to not get trapped in the every Black writer writes anti-racist books.
Right. Yes.
And in fact,
Right.
none of the Black writers I know write anti-racist books. They write sci-fi and they write all kinds of different things. So
right. Yes.
That's my question.
It's a great question, Victoria. Thank you. Yeah, there was a wonderful tweet by someone that said, for every one difficult book you suggest to someone by a Black author, please suggest 10 that are not, especially if it's children. Because there's only so much of the serious, difficult, challenging things that you can take, and that's not all that Black writers produce. There's a rainbow of things that they produce. So I think, there's a few things that I think are very straightforward that you can do. You can start buying books by Black authors that are across all genres or whatever genre you appreciate. You can buy gifts for children, especially for friends, Black authored books that aren't about anti-racism, but just anything, whatever genre they appreciate. You can buy from Black bookstores. Just the act of buying the books, I think, is fairly important because it sends a sales signal, a commercial signal to booksellers and to publishers and up the supply chain that helps reinforce the message that these books do well. There's this really terrible stereotype that BIPOC authors face where they're told that, well, your books don't sell to a mainstream audience. They only sell to this niche audience, or we can only do one of these books a season. Part of this is a marketing issue. The publishers don't know how to market the books properly. So anything you can do to help support those titles is going to be useful. And then Victoria, you actually mentioned something else that can be very useful, which is if you're an author who's speaking at a festival or on a panel, look at the composition or ask the event about the composition of the speakers or the panels or the event, and say, would you, or, if you see that it's all white faces, say, I won't appear, I'm not going to come unless you can increase the diversity, or you can recommend, have you thought about inviting this other person to appear? So that's also quite useful.
There's also, there's writersofcolor.org, I believe is the website, which is a listing of writers of color. And we had Karen Yin on the show a few weeks ago, and she talked about the Editors of Color database, which is terrific. So there are, it's not just the writers, it's the whole process of getting people who have a different feel for the whole process, the editing process. And very often there's a situation where I like to think I can edit anything, but I don't necessarily have the viewpoint that somebody else does. So those are a couple of good resources. And let's do one more. I think we have one more question. I think all the questions are about diversity, so it's a good hot topic now. But we have one more along those lines.
Yes.
Yes, Raina, if you want to unmute, I apologize if I mispronounced that.
Oh, that's all right. Hi, I'm Raina Van Tine. Thank you for hosting this the program. It's really great, and thank you, Jane, for taking on the hard issues. To just even talk about the lack of diversity in publishing, despite it's good to know that people are making an effort, and so and I do find that helpful. I'm a member of SCBWI, and when I go on and go to webinars or things that have people of color on them, it is encouraging, as a author. But my question is, in your opinion, what is the market like for books by Asian American writers? What's the market like for books that have Asian American protagonists in them?
I don't know that I have a good answer, because you could almost put in any ethnicity there, and I still wouldn't have an answer because publishing doesn't often, at least the statistics and the research and so on that I see, I've never seen a breakdown like that of this is the percentage of books we publish by these people or about these people, aside from the Children's Diversity Council survey, which maybe you're familiar with if you're familiar with SCBWI. Mm-hmm. So they do this survey where they do look at the racial makeup of the books being put out and where some of the disparities are. Some of the craziest disparities are with Indigenous when you look at percentage-wise. But so I've seen that done for the children's publishing industry, but one of the problems with that study is that it's self-selecting, meaning it relies on people to send in their books to be counted. So it's not necessarily a true accounting of what is being published. Mm-hmm. So it would be really nice to see someone do an audit of some kind. And I know that this is in fact what Penguin Random House and Macmillan and some of the other publishers are, I believe, they're attempting to do an audit of their lists to see where they're at now so that they can then measure in the future. So yeah, I hope that's not a mushy answer, but I don't know that anyone.
Yeah, but maybe that's a place to start, because if people are making, at the publishing level, making statements like, oh, we don't want to sell this kind of book because there's no market for it. Are they basing it on some sort of statistic? I mean, I realize it's a business, but even the so-called niche books have business, have a market too.
I mean, the problem is that a lot of the response is just the so-called publishing gut instinct. My gut tells me this isn't going to do well, and the gut is a reflection of people's own experiences and what they think about the world and what people are interested in. So another layer to all of this is, and I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but I just understand I'm stereotyping book publishing industry right now. When fiction in particular, as an example, gets published, there's this idea that, if it's going to really jump out like American Dirt, it's probably going to be a book club book. It's going to appeal to the white ladies who are in book clubs and that shop at independent bookstores. It's going to appeal to the library clubs. So book publishing has this very particular demographic that it's thinking about when it's publishing books, the white lady book club demographic. Mm. And so for books that fall outside of that, publishers kind of throw up their hands. They're like, we don't know what to do with it, which is really lazy and unacceptable. There are ways to reach those markets. There are ways to market books that aren't just to these, existing establishments that publishers have gotten good at cultivating. They can get good at cultivating other audiences too. They just haven't taken the trouble to do it. I think part of it's because of the makeup of the company. You don't have other voices in the room that are saying, you know, what you're saying is nonsense. It's not okay to say that Black people don't read or that they don't buy books. So there are all of these, like, just, it's lazy thinking. Some would say racist thinking. I think it's just institutionalized systemic attitudes about what sort of books sell that a lot of authors have experienced regardless of race. You know, people get rejected all the time because the editor feels like there's no audience for this, or I didn't connect with it, or I didn't love it. And some of these are very personal responses that reflect race, and also just reflect the fact that publishers have been miserable at marketing and promoting books by people of color. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in some sense too, that if that one time they published the book by the Asian American writer and it didn't sell, we can't do those books anymore. Whereas if the white person book fails, it's not because they were white, right? So there's this trap, and we got to get out of it.
Just clarify something. You said books by Indigenous authors, the percentage of that is very low. Is that that's in the big five? Yeah. What do we learn from?
I should, on a positive note, I think like publishers are like, I see efforts, right? So there was just a new imprint launched by HarperCollins that's strictly about Indigenous, it's by Indigenous authors for a mainstream audience. So I think I can't remember the name, unfortunately, but like we're seeing efforts to help address these shortfalls.
Yeah. Is that an acceptable response? I mean, if some people would say, you know, why are you creating a separate imprint for this? It should be mainstream.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose anytime you make an effort, you know, there's the other side to it.
There's it can be problematic. So the books that come out from that imprint need to be supported like they were coming from any other imprint. We'll see what happens. It's very new. It was only recently announced.
Right. And I suppose the thing is that, you know, a lot of it feels like too little too late, that, you know, you could do that without criticism if you didn't have a history of not addressing the problem.
Right.
I'm going to ask one more question because we're, you know, I feel like we just started talking, but we're already at an hour. But I do want to ask one more thing, and we've talked pretty much most of the time about the diversity issue, and it is definitely a great hot issue right now. Is there something to be learned from, we talked about the big five publishers, but you have sort of talked to so many people about the advantages of doing it yourself. Because you can self-publish now, and you can get noticed and be successful and even make money in that process. Is there something that we can learn about? Is it a different experience for authors from underrepresented communities when they go the self-publishing route?
This is a very interesting facet to explore, because for many years, you know, I feel like that's the most likely option that some authors had to get their work on the market. If you were a minority or in a marginalized community, you might have really had no choice but to self-publish. Certainly you see this with areas like Black romance, or there was a publisher started, I want to say in the 70s, called Just Us Publishing. Wade Hudson, I hope I'm getting his name right, and his wife started this company. He's one of the authors that produces titles, but they publish other authors too. And, you know, the reason I bring them up is because I heard them speaking on a panel about Black voices in publishing, and, you know, over 30 or 40 years, or 50 years actually, you know, they've built a really fine publishing company that in some regards is like what I see some self-published authors doing today, where they're creating a really robust independent publishing company essentially. So, you know, they're now in a position where they have to be very entrepreneurial, right? Just as a self-publishing author does. And you have to be willing to go to the retailers and come up with marketing plans that are probably not like what other people's marketing plans look like. So certainly self-publishing has been one way authors have gotten to market. And then sometimes they do transition over to traditional. So for example, Leslie Penelope, I hope I'm getting her name right. I think so. She self-published, I believe it was a speculative fiction novel or a series that ended up winning the Indie Author Award, which is put out by libraries. So when she got that award, or around that time, she got picked up by a traditional publisher, although she still self-publishes some of her work still. And then there's another author who won the Indie Author Award, Rand Walker. This was last year. These are both Black authors. And then I haven't followed up to see where that journey has taken him. But what I found really inspiring was that when, I don't know if people on this session would recall when Macmillan did the embargo on ebooks, where they made it impossible for libraries to buy new ebooks from the company unless, I won't go into the particulars, but librarians hated this. It was a very anti-library move. There was a library system in Florida, Broward County, that decided, okay, we are not merchandising any more bestsellers. We're not going to promote or put on Reader's Advisory these best-selling books. They do not need our help. We're going to start putting forth the authors that are getting missed. And Rand Walker was one of those authors who had won that Indie Book Award. So I'm really going, I think I'm kind of gone on several tangents in answer to this question, but I think the bottom line on it is self-publishing has been a way for all sorts of authors who are not in an advantageous position to make their way. And it's hard and it's a struggle. But fortunately, because of ebooks, because of Amazon, because of other conditions in the industry, it's been easier to get noticed, like Rand Walker and Leslie Penelope got noticed. And if they want to move to traditional publishing, I think there are more ways for them to do so, assuming that's what they want. But I think, you know, for the Just Us publishing company, the couple I mentioned, you know, they didn't, well, I wonder what would happen today if they started that company, or what if they had started self-publishing today? Would they have quickly moved into traditional? But I feel like at the point they started, they just had to say, we're starting our own publishing company because no one will accept us.
All right, one more thing. We've had a tradition on the show, not every guest, but we've had a lot of cats wander through. And does your cat sometimes get in the picture? Right?
She does, and she has been so good. She's been lying in her bed over there the whole time.
Yeah, you mentioned looking at things on people's shelves in the background, and of course, at one point, reflected in that plaque, the award over your right shoulder, I saw the cat wandering taking a few steps. I wondered if it would join us, but apparently not.
Should I pull her over?
I think you probably should. People, I mean, I don't have a cat, but people in the room are going to go crazy. I don't know why. Jane Friedman's cat, everybody.
This is Zelda.
Zelda, great name. Named after Zelda, or just like the name?
It's technically named after The Legend of Zelda, the game, but I found out recently that name was actually inspired by Zelda Fitzgerald. So I get both.
Didn't know. Okay, there you go. Exactly. Excellent. What's the award you have displayed there? The plaque.
Oh, that's a really ancient award that I haven't done anything with. It's instructor of the quarter, winter 2005 at Beckfield College. It is not important.
Wow, excellent. All
Or
right.
I guess it was important 15 years ago, not anymore.
Well, sure. No, instructor of the quarter. It's nice to get those props, and I'm thrilled to know that we have an instructor there. I think you're our first instructor of the quarter at Beckfield College to be on the show. So.
I'm sure.
Yes, thank you very much for being our guest. I feel like I've got 100 more questions. We just go on and on, but appreciate you coming and appreciate the chance to get to know you. And boy, we did tackle some really good topics today, I think. So
Indeed.
Thank you, everybody, very much, and we'll see you not next week. We're going to take a break next week, and we will. Oops. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.